Sometimes the people we spend our whole lives searching for are sitting only a few feet away, waiting for us to notice. I didn't know that night would change everything. I only knew I was exhausted. The automatic doors of St. Catherine Medical Center slid open with a soft hiss as I stepped inside, grateful to escape the cold November rain. My sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, and I pulled my damp cardigan tighter around my shoulders. It was 2:07 in the morning. Most people my age were asleep. Some were probably out with friends, laughing in crowded bars or curled up beside someone they loved. I was carrying a paper bag with a turkey sandwich and a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Life had a funny way of ignoring your plans. 3 hours earlier, my foster mother had called from this hospital room to tell me she was feeling better after her procedure and insisted I go home. I tried. I really did. But halfway there, something kept pulling at me. A strange feeling I couldn't explain. So I turned around and came back. The hospital was quieter now. The fluorescent lights seemed softer. The nurses behind the station spoke in low voices. Somewhere down the hall, a television murmured to itself. I passed the waiting area and slowed my steps. That was when I saw him. He was sitting alone near the large windows overlooking the city. One chair, one man, one untouched cup of coffee resting on the table beside him. The rain traced silver lines across the glass behind him, blurring the lights of Manhattan into a watercolor painting of gold and white. He looked completely out of place. Not because he was loud. Not because he demanded attention. Quite the opposite. The silence around him seemed intentional, as if the world itself had decided not to disturb him. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a dark suit. His hands rested loosely together. His posture was perfect, controlled, patient. But there was something else. Something lonely. I should have kept walking. Most people would have. But ever since I was little, I had a habit of noticing lonely people. Maybe because I knew what loneliness felt like. Maybe because some part of me always hoped someone would notice me too. I glanced around. The waiting area was nearly empty. Then I looked back at him. The chair across from him was vacant. For some reason, seeing that empty chair made my chest tighten. He stared out the window, unaware that I was standing there. Or maybe he was aware. Maybe he noticed everything. I couldn't tell. My fingers tightened around the paper bag. Before I could change my mind, I started walking toward him. Each step felt strangely important. Ridiculous, considering I was approaching a complete stranger. But something inside me refused to turn around. When I reached the table, he finally looked up. His eyes met mine. For a second, I forgot every word I had planned to say. He had the kind of face people remembered. Strong features. Silver beginning to appear at his temples. Calm eyes that looked like they had seen too much and trusted too little. Yet beneath all that composure, I caught a glimpse of something fragile. A sadness so carefully hidden that most people would never see it. I swallowed hard. Suddenly nervous. Suddenly aware of how strange this must look. Then I pointed toward the empty chair and offered the smallest smile. "Can I sit with you?" I whispered. For a moment, he simply stared at me. The rain tapped softly against the glass. Somewhere behind us, an elevator chimed. Time seemed to stretch. Then something unexpected happened. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Not quite disbelief. Something in between. He looked at the empty chair. Then back at me. "You can," he said quietly. And neither of us had the slightest idea that 22 years of secrets had just taken a seat at that table. I expected the conversation to last maybe 30 seconds. A polite exchange. A few awkward words. Then I would return to my foster mother's room, and he would go back to staring at the rain. Instead, neither of us moved. I lowered myself into the chair across from him and set the paper bag on the table. Up close, he looked even more tired than I had first realized. Not physically tired. Something deeper. The kind of exhaustion that sleep could not fix. The city lights reflected in the window behind him, casting faint silver streaks across his face. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence should have felt uncomfortable. Somehow it did not. It felt familiar. Strange as that sounds. Like sitting beside someone you had known years ago but could not quite place. Finally, I lifted the cold coffee cup in my hand and laughed softly. "I think I bought this 3 hours ago." His eyes dropped to the cup. "And you are still drinking it." "I paid $4.50 for it. At this point it is about principle." To my surprise, a faint smile appeared. Small, brief, but real. It transformed his entire face for a second before disappearing again. "That is a terrible principle," he said. Probably, I admitted. But I am committed now. He glanced toward the untouched coffee beside him. Mine is older. Then you win. Another silence settled between us. Outside, rain continued sliding down the glass. A maintenance cart rolled quietly through the hallway. Somewhere nearby, a nurse laughed at something a coworker said. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet something about this one felt different. Are you waiting for someone? I asked. His gaze drifted back toward the window. Not exactly. There was something final about the answer. Like a door gently closing. I nodded. I knew enough not to push. People carried private grief into hospitals every day. Sometimes they wanted to talk. Sometimes they only wanted someone nearby. I reached into the paper bag and pulled out the sandwich. I bought two by accident. That was not entirely true. Would you like one? His eyes narrowed slightly. You offer food to strangers often? Only the intimidating ones. That earned another almost smile. Intimidating. You were sitting alone in a hospital at 2 a.m. wearing a suit that probably costs more than my car. He looked down at the suit as if he had forgotten he was wearing it. That is a very specific observation. I noticed things. Clearly. For a moment, his expression softened. Then his eyes lifted fully to mine. The change was immediate. Something flickered across his face. Confusion. Recognition. Shock. Gone so quickly I almost thought I imagined it. He kept looking at me. Not in a rude way. Not even in a curious way. More like someone trying desperately to remember something important. My smile faded. What? I asked. He did not answer right away. His gaze remained fixed on my face. Specifically my eyes. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. Do I have mustard on my face? The question seemed to pull him back to reality. No, his voice sounded distant. No, you do not. Yet he continued staring. I had experienced awkward conversations before. This felt different, almost unsettling, as though he had seen a ghost and was trying to convince himself he had not. Finally, he looked away, but not before I noticed something strange. For the first time since I sat down, the absolute control he carried around himself had cracked. Just for a second, just enough to reveal genuine emotion underneath. He folded his hands together and stared at the rain. You have very familiar eyes, he said quietly. I laughed nervously. That is a new one. He did not laugh. The reflection of city lights shimmered across the glass behind him. I knew someone once, he said. A long time ago. Then he fell silent again. And for reasons I could not explain, a chill ran down my spine. There are moments that seem ordinary while they are happening and only reveal their importance years later. This was one of them. I looked at him across the table, waiting for him to explain what he meant. The rain continued falling outside, turning the city beyond the glass into a blur of silver and gold. He had gone quiet again, as if speaking those few words had already revealed more than he intended. Someone you cared about? I asked carefully. His eyes remained fixed on the window. For a second I thought he might ignore the question entirely. Then he nodded once. Very much. Something in his voice made me regret asking. Not because he seemed angry, because he sounded sad. Deeply sad. The kind of sadness that had lived with him for years. I looked down at the sandwich wrapper in my hands. I am sorry. He gave a small shrug. Life does not ask our permission before changing. I smiled faintly. That sounds like something printed inside a fortune cookie. To my surprise, that almost smile appeared again. Perhaps. The silence returned, but it felt easier now. Less like two strangers sharing a table, and more like two people waiting for something neither could name. After a moment, my phone buzzed. A text message from my foster mother asking if I was still in the building. I typed back quickly. Still here. Be up soon. Love you. When I looked up again, I noticed his attention had shifted toward the chain around my neck. Instinctively, my fingers moved to the small silver pendant resting beneath my sweater. It was an old habit. Whenever I felt nervous, I touched it without thinking. His expression changed immediately. Every trace of calm disappeared. He stared at the pendant so intensely that I actually glanced down to make sure nothing was wrong with it. What? I asked. His eyes never left the necklace. May I see that? My hand froze. The request was simple enough, but something about the way he asked made my pulse quicken. Slowly, I lifted the pendant into view. A small silver charm worn smooth by years of handling. Nothing expensive. Nothing remarkable. At least that was what I had always believed. He leaned forward slightly. The overhead lights reflected in his eyes. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he inhaled sharply. The sound was so quiet most people would have missed it. I did not. Where did you get it? He asked. I blinked. This? He nodded. I have had it forever. Who gave it to you? I laughed softly. You are asking questions like a detective now. But he did not smile. The intensity in his gaze remained. Emily. Hearing my name from him felt strangely personal. Who gave it to you? I looked down at the pendant. Honestly, I do not know. His expression tightened. You do not know? My foster mother says I was already wearing it when I came into her life. For the first time since I sat down, he looked genuinely shaken. The color seemed to drain slightly from his face. How old were you? Around 6. The answer hung between us. He looked back at the necklace, then at me, then back to the necklace again. Something was happening behind those eyes. Calculations. Memories. Questions. Too many questions. Suddenly, the elevator doors opened nearby. A tall man in a dark suit stepped into the waiting area. His gaze swept the room before landing directly on us. Relief flashed across his face. He immediately started walking toward our table. The moment he arrived, he stopped beside the chair and lowered his voice. Mr. Moretti, I have been looking everywhere for you. I stared. Mr. Moretti. The name meant nothing to me, but the reaction on the newcomer's face did. Respect. Loyalty. Concern. The man beside me stood slowly. Yet before he turned away, his eyes found mine one more time. Then they dropped to the silver pendant resting against my sweater. And for the first time all night, I felt certain of one thing. Whatever he had seen when he looked at that necklace, it had changed everything. The strangest part was not that he left. It was how he left. Most people would have offered an explanation. A goodbye? Something. Vincent Moretti simply stood, his eyes lingering on the silver pendant one final time before he followed the man in the suit toward the elevators. I remained at the table long after they disappeared. The hospital suddenly felt different. The same lights. The same rain against the windows. The same distant voices from the nurse's station. Yet everything felt slightly off, as if an invisible thread had been pulled loose somewhere in the fabric of the night. I looked down at the pendant resting in my palm. The silver surface had been worn smooth over the years. I had touched it thousands of times without ever questioning it. Now I could not stop staring at it. Who gave it to me? Why had it affected him so strongly? And why had he looked at me as though I carried the answer to a question he had been asking for years? My phone buzzed again. This time my foster mother was calling. I answered immediately. Emily. Her voice sounded sleepy. Are you still wandering around this hospital? I laughed softly. Maybe. You know, normal people go home at 2 in the morning. Normal people do not have you. She chuckled. The familiar warmth in her voice settled my nerves. Come upstairs, sweetheart, before I start thinking you found a better family. The joke should have felt harmless. Instead it landed strangely. Better family. The words echoed in my head long after the call ended. 20 minutes later, I stepped into her room, carrying fresh coffee from the vending machine. She looked much better than she had the day before. Color had returned to her cheeks. Her smile appeared the moment she saw me. There she is. I kissed her forehead and settled into the chair beside her bed. We talked about ordinary things. Her physical therapy. My classes. A neighbor who kept leaving holiday decorations up all year. Normal conversations. Safe conversations. Yet throughout it all, my thoughts kept drifting back to the waiting area downstairs. Eventually she noticed. What happened? She asked suddenly. What do you mean? You have been staring at the same spot on that wall for 5 minutes. I looked away from the blank wall and smiled sheepishly. I met someone downstairs. One eyebrow lifted immediately. Someone interesting? Not like that. That means yes. I laughed. No, just strange. Then I told her about the man by the window. The conversation. The questions about the pendant. The way his expression changed when he saw it. As I spoke, her smile slowly faded. At first I thought I imagined it. Then I noticed her fingers tightening slightly around the blanket. Mom, I asked quietly. What is it? She looked away. Just for a second. A tiny movement. Most people would never have noticed. But I did. Nothing. The answer came too quickly. You know something. She forced a smile. Emily, there are thousands of people in New York. Sometimes strangers remind us of people we once knew. That is all. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Yet something inside me remained unsettled. As dawn approached, I finally left the hospital and drove home through nearly empty streets. The rain had stopped. Pale morning light was beginning to spread across the skyline. I parked outside my apartment building and climbed the stairs to my third-floor unit. Exhaustion weighed heavily on my shoulders. All I wanted was sleep. But when I stepped inside, something caught my attention immediately. An envelope rested on the floor just inside the door. No stamp. No return address. My name was written neatly across the front. Emily Carter. A chill moved through me. Slowly, I bent down and picked it up. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Then I slid one finger beneath the seal and opened it. My hands were shaking before I even unfolded the paper. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the strange feeling that had followed me all the way home from the hospital. The envelope contained only a single photograph. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. Just a picture. I stared at it for several seconds before my brain fully processed what I was seeing. It was an old photograph. The edges were worn. The colors had faded with time. A young woman stood beside a lake, smiling at the camera. Sunlight reflected off the water behind her. She looked happy. Completely, effortlessly happy. At first I did not understand why someone would send me a random picture. Then my eyes drifted lower. The woman was wearing a necklace. My necklace. The same silver pendant hanging around my neck at that very moment. A chill spread through my chest. I sat down slowly on the edge of my couch. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet. Too small. Too empty. My fingers traced the photograph. The woman could not have been older than 30. She had light brown hair that moved softly in the wind. But it was her eyes that stopped me. My breath caught. They looked exactly like mine. I told myself that was impossible. New York alone had millions of people. Similar features meant nothing. Yet the resemblance was unsettling. The longer I stared at the image, the harder it became to ignore. I flipped the photograph over. Written in neat handwriting were 4 words. Find Margaret before she leaves. That was all. No signature. No date. No explanation. Just a name. Margaret. I read the sentence 3 times. Then 5. Then 10. By sunrise, I still had no idea what it meant. Sleep never came. Around 8 o'clock that morning, my phone rang. It was my foster mother. Emily, she asked immediately. You sound exhausted. I never went to sleep. A pause followed. Are you still thinking about last night? I looked at the photograph resting on my kitchen table. Maybe. Sweetheart, her voice softened. Some mysteries are not worth chasing. The comment immediately caught my attention. What does that mean? Silence. Too much silence. Mom, it means people spend years looking for answers that never make them happier. I sat down slowly. Do you know a woman named Margaret? The line went completely quiet. Not for 1 second. Not for 2. Long enough for my heart to begin racing. Why would you ask that? She said finally. The question felt wrong. Most people would have answered yes or no. Do you know her? I repeated. Emily. Her voice sounded different now. Nervous. Careful. Where did you hear that name? Every instinct inside me sharpened. Something was happening. Something important. Who is Margaret? I asked again. Another long pause. Then she sighed. I think we need to talk. My stomach tightened immediately. About what? Not over the phone. Outside my apartment window, morning traffic moved through the city. Horns sounded in the distance. A siren echoed somewhere several blocks away. Ordinary sounds. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. I will come by this afternoon, she continued quietly. Just promise me something. What? Promise me you will not try to find Margaret before we talk. I looked back at the photograph. At the woman wearing my pendant. At the message written on the back. Find Margaret before she leaves. A strange feeling settled deep inside my chest. The same feeling that had pulled me back into the hospital the night before. The same feeling that told me my life was beginning to split into 2 parts. Everything before these questions. And everything after. Emily, my foster mother asked. Promise me. I closed my eyes. Then I looked at the photograph one more time. I will try, I whispered. But even as I said the words, I knew I was already reaching for my keys. The trouble with promises is that sometimes your heart breaks them before your mind has a chance to object. Less than 30 minutes after hanging up with my foster mother, I was sitting in my car with the photograph on the passenger seat and my phone balanced in my hand. Margaret. It was not exactly a common clue. Yet somehow it was all I had. The message on the back of the photograph kept replaying in my head. Find Margaret before she leaves. Not if she leaves. Before she leaves. Whoever sent it believed time mattered. I opened my laptop and started searching. Hundreds of results appeared. Thousands, actually. Most were useless. By noon I had accomplished nothing except drinking too much coffee and making myself anxious. Then my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Hello. A brief silence answered. Then a familiar voice. Emily. My grip tightened instantly. Vincent Moretti. How did you get my number? The question slipped out before I could stop it. I have resources. His voice remained calm. Controlled. Yet underneath it I sensed urgency. I need to see you. I stared through the windshield at the busy street below my apartment. Why? Another pause. Because I believe someone is hiding information from both of us. My pulse quickened. You know about Margaret? Silence. Not confirmation. Not denial. Just silence. Where are you? He asked. Every reasonable instinct told me not to meet a man I barely knew. Yet nothing about the past 24 hours had been reasonable. An hour later, I found myself sitting in a quiet cafe on the Upper East Side. Vincent arrived exactly on time. Dark coat, calm expression, the same eyes that seemed to carry entire decades inside them. He slid into the seat across from me and immediately noticed the photograph lying beside my coffee cup. His gaze sharpened. Where did you get this? It was left outside my apartment. I pushed the photograph toward him. For the first time since I met him, genuine emotion crossed his face without restraint. He picked up the picture carefully, almost reverently. Her name was Olivia. The words landed softly. You knew her? His eyes remained fixed on the image. Very well. Something in his answer made my chest tighten. Not because of what he said, because of what he did not say. Who sent this to me? I asked. I do not know. He turned the photograph over and read the message on the back. The moment he saw Margaret's name, his expression changed. Instantly. You know her. It was not a question. He looked at me for a long moment before nodding once. Yes. My heart started pounding. Finally, an answer. Then tell me who she is. Vincent leaned back slowly. Outside the cafe window, pedestrians hurried through the afternoon sunlight. Inside, everything felt perfectly still. Margaret worked for a family I once knew. What family? He hesitated. Mine. I blinked. What does that have to do with me? He opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. His phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Whatever he saw immediately darkened his expression. What happened? I asked. Vincent stood so abruptly that the chair shifted slightly behind him. We are too late. A cold sensation moved through my chest. Too late for what? He looked directly at me. Margaret checked out of her assisted living residence this morning. The air seemed to leave my lungs. Where did she go? No one knows. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Vincent reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. Before she left, he said quietly, she requested that this be delivered if anyone ever came looking for her. My eyes dropped to the paper in his hand. What is it? Vincent looked at me with an expression I could not read. Sadness. Hope. Fear. Maybe all three. Then he handed me the note. Across the front, written in trembling handwriting, were 6 words that made my entire world stop turning. If Emily finds me, tell her everything. For a few seconds I could not breathe. The sounds of the cafe faded into the background. The conversations. The coffee machines. The traffic outside. Everything seemed to move farther away as I stared at the note in my hands. If Emily finds me, tell her everything. My name. Not a coincidence. Not a possibility. My name. I read the sentence again. Then again. Each time it felt heavier. More real. Why would she write this? I asked quietly. Vincent did not answer immediately. He looked out the window for a moment before returning his attention to me. Because she expected this day to come. My fingers tightened around the paper. Expected what day? His jaw shifted slightly, like he was choosing every word with extreme care. The day someone finally started asking the right questions. I looked down at the photograph resting beside the note. The woman named Olivia smiled back at me from another lifetime. The silver pendant around her neck seemed almost identical to the one resting against my chest. Suddenly, I felt as though I was standing in the middle of a puzzle where every missing piece somehow belonged to me. Who was Olivia? I asked. Vincent's eyes softened instantly. It was the first time I had seen that expression on his face. Not power, not control, grief. She was the kindest person I ever knew. The answer came quietly. Honestly, was she family? His gaze dropped to the photograph. Yes. Something inside me tightened. I could feel it. The closer we moved toward the truth, the more nervous he became. And somehow that frightened me more than anything else. Before I could ask another question, my phone vibrated. It was my foster mother. For a moment, I considered ignoring the call. Then guilt won. I answered. Emily. Her voice sounded worried. Where are you? I hesitated. Out. With him. My eyes immediately lifted toward Vincent. How do you know about him? Silence. The kind that says too much. My heart began beating faster. Mom. Come home. Her voice cracked slightly. Please. I had never heard her sound like that before. Not once in 22 years. What is happening? I whispered. Another pause. Then she said the words that changed everything. There are things I should have told you a long time ago. I closed my eyes. Every instinct screamed the same message. She knows. She has always known. When the call ended, I sat perfectly still. Vincent studied me carefully. She wants to talk. It was not a question. Yes. Then you should listen. I laughed nervously. You sound very certain. His expression became unreadable again. Sometimes answers arrive when people are finally ready to tell the truth. Neither of us touched our coffee after that. The conversation slowly faded. Not because we had nothing to say, because both of us sensed something larger approaching. An hour later, I parked outside the small house where I had grown up. The familiar white porch. The flower pots near the front steps. The wind chimes hanging beside the door. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet I felt like a stranger standing outside my own life. My foster mother opened the door before I even knocked. She looked exhausted. More exhausted than she had in the hospital. Her eyes immediately dropped to the photograph in my hand, then to the pendant around my neck. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she stepped aside. Come in. I walked into the living room. The same room where she had helped me with homework. Celebrated birthdays. Comforted me through heartbreaks. Yet now it felt different. Like the walls themselves were hiding secrets. She sat down slowly on the couch. Her hands trembled slightly. Then she looked at me with tears already gathering in her eyes. Emily, she whispered. Before I tell you anything else, there is something you need to understand. My throat tightened. What? Her gaze fell to the silver pendant resting against my sweater. When she spoke again, her voice barely rose above a whisper. That necklace was never supposed to leave your family. The room felt smaller after she said it. Smaller and somehow unfamiliar. I stared at my foster mother across the living room, waiting for her to tell me she had misspoken, waiting for her to laugh and explain that none of this meant what I thought it meant. But she did not laugh. She looked down at her hands instead. The silence stretched between us. Heavy, unavoidable. What do you mean, my family? I finally asked. My voice barely sounded like my own. She closed her eyes for a moment before answering. I always hoped I would never have to explain this. Tears filled her eyes. Real tears. The kind I had only seen a handful of times throughout my life. Emily, I love you. My throat tightened immediately. I know. No. She shook her head gently. I need you to understand that before anything else. Nothing I am about to tell you changes how much I love you. A strange fear settled into my chest. The kind that arrives right before your world shifts beneath your feet. Slowly, she stood and walked toward a small cabinet near the fireplace. For several seconds, she searched through a drawer before pulling out a faded folder. My heart immediately began racing. She carried it back to the couch and placed it between us. I kept these all these years. Her fingers rested on the folder. Part of me always believed someone would come looking. I looked down at the worn edges. The paper inside had clearly been opened many times. Carefully preserved. Carefully hidden. Who am I? The question escaped before I could stop it. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. You are Emily. She reached across the couch and squeezed my hand. The same young woman I raised. The same person who makes me proud every day. Her voice trembled. But you were not born Emily Carter. My pulse thundered in my ears. She opened the folder. Inside were documents. Old photographs. Newspaper clippings. Records I had never seen before. One picture immediately caught my attention. A young woman stood smiling beside a man with dark hair and calm eyes. The same eyes I had seen sitting beside a hospital window. Vincent, 20 years younger. My breath stopped. No, the word left my mouth before I could process it. No, my foster mother lowered her gaze. Her name was Olivia Moretti. The room blurred for a second. I looked from the photograph to the silver pendant resting against my chest, then back to Vincent's face frozen in time inside the picture. Olivia. My voice sounded distant. Fragile. The woman from the photograph. She nodded. Yes. My heart felt too large for my chest. Every memory from the past few days suddenly collided together. The pendant. Vincent's reaction. Margaret. The note. The questions. The strange familiarity I had felt from the very beginning. Who was she? I whispered. My foster mother wiped away a tear. Your mother. The world stopped. Completely. I could still hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Still hear distant traffic outside the house. Yet none of it felt real anymore. I stared at the photograph. At Olivia's smile. At the necklace. At the man standing beside her. And Vincent. My voice cracked. Her answer came softly, almost apologetically. Vincent Moretti is your father. I could not speak. Could not think. The sentence repeated inside my head again and again without making sense. Father. Vincent. The man from the hospital. The stranger who somehow never felt like a stranger. My hands began trembling. Why did nobody tell me? Tears slipped down my foster mother's cheeks. Because someone wanted to protect you. I looked up sharply. From what? She hesitated. Then she opened the final section of the folder. Inside rested a birth certificate. The paper had yellowed with age. My eyes dropped to the name printed across the top. Emily Olivia Moretti. For 22 years I had believed I knew exactly who I was. And in a single afternoon, that certainty vanished forever. Some truths arrive like thunder. Others arrive like a whisper so quiet that it changes your life before you realize you have heard it. I do not remember much of the next hour. I remember tears, questions, long silences. I remember sitting on the couch clutching a birth certificate while my foster mother told me everything she knew. Margaret had worked for the Moretti family years ago. Olivia had trusted her. When tragedy and confusion tore lives apart, Margaret believed she was protecting a little girl by taking her away. One decision became years. Years became decades. And somewhere along the way, the truth disappeared beneath good intentions and fear. By the time evening arrived, my entire world felt unfamiliar. Yet one thought refused to leave me alone. Vincent, my father, the man who had sat across from me in a hospital waiting area and somehow recognized something before I did. I left the house just before sunset. My foster mother did not try to stop me. She only hugged me tightly and whispered that she loved me. I told her I loved her too. Because no revelation could erase 22 years of bedtime stories, school plays, birthday cakes, and unconditional love. Some people give you life. Others teach you how to live it. She had done both in her own way. The drive across Manhattan felt surreal. Golden light reflected off glass towers. People hurried along sidewalks carrying shopping bags and coffee cups, completely unaware that my universe had shifted in a single day. When I finally reached St. Catherine Medical Center, the sky had turned deep blue. The rain was gone. The city looked washed clean. I stepped through the automatic doors and followed the familiar hallway toward the waiting area. My heart pounded harder with every step. Part of me wondered if he would even be there. Maybe it had all been coincidence. Maybe fate was not as poetic as people liked to believe. Then I turned the corner and stopped. He was sitting exactly where I had first seen him. Same chair, same window, same untouched cup of coffee resting beside him. For a moment, I simply stood there watching. He looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like a man who had spent years carrying hope and disappointment in equal measure. Slowly, he looked up. Our eyes met. The expression on his face changed instantly. He knew. Somehow he knew. Neither of us spoke. I walked toward the table. Every step felt strangely familiar, as if I had already lived this moment somewhere in a forgotten memory. When I reached the chair across from him, I stopped. The same empty chair. The same place where everything had begun. Vincent rose to his feet. His composure remained intact, but his eyes betrayed him. Hope, fear, relief, all of it visible now. I looked at the silver pendant resting against my sweater, then back at him. For a second, neither of us seemed capable of finding the right words. 22 years of absence is a difficult thing to summarize. Finally, I felt a small smile tug at the corner of my mouth. The same nervous smile I had worn on the night we met. The same question that had changed both of our lives returned to me. I pulled out the chair and looked at him. Dad, I said softly. His breath caught. Would you mind if I sat with you? For a moment he could not answer. Then a smile appeared. Small at first, then real. The kind of smile that reaches a person's eyes. I would like that very much, he whispered. I sat down. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. The hospital hummed quietly around us. Nothing dramatic happened. No speeches. No perfect ending. just two people sharing a table that no longer felt empty. Sometimes destiny does not arrive with grand announcements. Sometimes it arrives with an ordinary chair, a rainy night, and a simple question. And sometimes the family you spend your life searching for has been waiting on the other side of that question all along.